You're going to want to vaccinate for this one. It's Mikey J on KGUP Presents.
5, 4...
How much false can you find? And there's lots in history. I came across the images of the 1893 Chicago World Exposition, and it blew my mind because it looked like ancient Rome in the middle of downtown Chicago. And as I looked at it further, well, here's another one in Philadelphia, here's another one in St. Louis, in Buffalo, in San Francisco, and then as soon as they were done, they tore them all down and threw them in the garbage. That just told me there's something wrong with all of these. The story of the Expositions is a gigantic lie. So many things about the 1800s that seem strange and weird, right as this sort of period ends of unbelievable strangeness, and all of a sudden these fairs spring up all over the world with impossible buildings we're talking about, which are colossal structures.
How are you doing this fine evening? I'm Mikey J, and you're watching and listening to KGUP Presents. Now, I don't have a cool catchphrase because, that kind of describes my personality because, for the most part, I'm pretty quiet, but that doesn't sound very catchy, like the very quiet Mikey J, or he hates social media, it's Mikey J. Thank goodness for Nicole B, because she's been doing my intros this past year. And, back in my old podcast days, Christopher Colt used to do my old intros, and he would say stuff like, he's clean cut and with perfect posture, it's Mikey J. But, back in those days, I wore a suit everywhere I went, and it was kind of like my signature look, and, just being suited up, and those were great times. But now I just like wearing regular t-shirts just like this. And, I wanted to have a preface before we bring on our guest. And, because I wanted to share something with you all with Mr. Mickoski, because I think it's irrelevant to the conversation. And I don't know about you, but I think people have a tendency of like prejudging everyone that we meet, whether we like to admit it or not. And even if it's just for a split second, I think it's just human nature, and societies have kind of subconsciously programmed us to think this certain way. And I say this because, like a week ago, my perception of Howdie Mickoski was completely different. I only knew him from his like videos about, spiritual warfare and like exposing the expositions and the Egyptian, because he wrote a book called Power of Then, revealing the Egypt's lost wisdom. And then he's known for his recent book, which is called Falling for Truth. But during this whole panoramic, as I like to call it, I stumbled across, like I said, a bunch of his videos where he speaks about the world fairs, like the Chicago of 1893, the World Fair in Philadelphia in 1867, San Francisco in 1894, and 1915. And then he mentions the World Fair of Buffalo in 1901, St. Louis in 1904. There's literally dozens of World Fairs that happened during the later half of the 1800s. And the official stories, if you do your own investigation, you will discover that the stories surrounding the fairs just don't really add up. And you might be thinking, a big deal, it's just a fair. But if you look into the official stories, the official history, you'll find photos and these building structures, and these fairs were gigantic grounds. They're unlike any of the fairs that we're used to seeing today in our local cities. It's as if ancient Rome was here long before the the 13 colonies first were formed here. And then once these fairs are finished, I mean, they were completely torn down and destroyed. So I find it to be one of the most fascinating topics. And it's one of the main reasons why I wanted to invite Howdie Mickoski here on KGUP Presents. You know, he's not just an historian, he's also a spiritualist. So he's got a great perspective on life and religion, and especially the truth about, you know, the Cathars, the Knights Templar, the Holy Grail, Stonehenge. And I hope we have time, but I'd like to talk about Plato's Cave, spiritual wisdom, spiritual warfare that we're currently under. And his latest book talks a lot about reality and all that good stuff. And before I get ahead of myself too far, you guys should look him up. Go in the search bar, look up Howdie Mickoski Talks, or you can click the link in the description. And without further ado, let's bring him on. It's Mr. Howdie Mickoski. How you doing today?
I am actually doing great. It's been 2 weeks of no rain here, so it is rain today, which means I don't have to water the crop.
I know how that feels. It's we're here in Dallas, Texas, and it's been raining ever since the Snowmageddon, and it's like every 3 days it was just raining, and it was just miserable, and it kind of makes you wonder if they're just manipulating the weather. You know, I mean, I've come across so many articles about that. And it's definitely true. I mean, they use frequencies and these sulfates to control the weather. And I was like, when is it going to end? You know, but the summer's finally here and it's starting to get nice.
Yeah. So where would you like to go? What would you like to talk about?
I was contemplating where to begin because, you know, I think you've had many stages of awakenings. I think ever since you wrote your first book, and I guess we can start at the beginning and just kind of like, you know, what was your first awakening? I guess you can call that.
Okay. We'll try to define some of these terms for people because these terms get thrown around a lot, and I have problems sometimes with the word. So I've tried to use words like realization. For me, that's something within reality itself. So within what I see as a dream. So something that you understand about how things operate here, or if you do A, the result will be B, those kind of things. That's about a realization. It doesn't change who you are, but it changes how you operate in your life. What I would call an awakening would be when you actually step out of all of the things you had ever believed to be true. Including your belief in yourself. And when you step away from all of that and see that you are something beyond all of it, that would be an awakening. And then there's a long potential process of integrating that and dealing with it, because it's not as fun and happy as the books try to make it sound. It's very, very difficult. So I would say my first realization, if I take the language correct, would have been in 1994. I had an ex-girlfriend who was murdered, and when that happened, there was an instantaneous. Like first, I went. I guess the word you would describe is I kind of went blank. Like I literally sort of blanked out. I remember I was cooking on the stove actually. And if it wasn't somebody didn't come and move the pot off the stove, I would have burned the house down, because I literally had lost the sense of my surroundings and what was going on when I got the news and saw the news story on television. And but what started there was an inner process of saying, I had always believed, or I've been told, right? Society tells us there's certain steps you follow. You go to school, you be a nice person, you work really hard, you get your degree, then you go get a job, and then you go get married, and then you have kids, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And this woman that I knew was running her life as perfect as you possibly could. She was literally the catchphrase of society, perfect. And here she was, 23, dead. And I had to step back at that point and say, okay, has what society's been feeding me all of this time, is that true or not? Because here's a person who followed it perfectly, and it didn't work at all for her. And this began what you would call inner introspection, right? Like real spiritual work is not about going external. It's not about trying to be happy. It's not about trying to get better. It's not about trying to improve yourself. It's about looking at what you've come to believe about everything and start to ask, well, why do I believe that? And that's how it started. That was the first part for me, was after her death. It started that process.
Wow. Did you already have a degree in history, or how did that all begin?
Yeah, I had that when, like, she was someone I knew in university, who I dated at the end of my university career. And yeah, I went, when I had finished high school, I had sort of two options. I was very creative back then, and I was a comedian for 15 years, actually. People wouldn't know that now. If you watch my videos or even listen to this talk I'm having with you, I'm not very funny anymore, you know. But back then I was very funny and creative. So I had these two lines of possibility at the end of high school. Did I want to go to university and take something like history, which I really loved and loved to study and play hockey, or would I like to do something creative, maybe go into screenwriting or documentary filmmaking or something like that? So I had this very difficult choice of sort of two completely different kind of choices. I chose history. I'm not sure that was the right choice overall for the happiness of my life, but I did. And while I was a bit of you could call me a bit of a jerk from the standpoint of I didn't believe everything the professors tried to tell me, but looking back now, I can't believe I didn't ask way more questions and bring up way more problems. I accept it, as probably everyone in every field of study does. We accept so much so easily because the person in front of us is presented as an authority, or the book is presented as an authority, and we just say, oh, well, they must know what they're talking about, and we stop questioning. And I did a lot of that through my university career.
And so you going to Egypt, because after you had your degree and everything, you went to go study in Egypt. How did that change your perception of like history and stuff? Was that the beginning point?
Well, what happened is actually after I finished my degree, right around that same time, my father had stolen all of my money. And so I was basically destitute in the world. And then I had this, with the girlfriend being murdered, I ran off to Australia for a year, because it was kind of the farthest you could get away from North America was go to Australia. So I ran away from things, but of course, everything followed you, right? You can't run away from your problems just follow you. And so my inner pain couldn't hide from me. And when I came back and was trying really, really hard to function in the world, I moved back to Toronto, trying to be a comedian, trying to write scripts, trying to do whatever I could do. My life was spiraling horribly into a black hole. And it got to the point where I thought, I think killing myself is the best option. That life was so bad. And it wasn't just life was bad. I noticed I was becoming like mean and manipulative. I was actually manipulating people. The women I was dating, I was treating really poorly. And I remember one day I kind of just looked in the mirror like, what's happened to me? Like, how did I get like this? This is not the person I've always known. I don't like this. And I was so upset with everything. I thought, okay, I'll kill myself. But I couldn't come up with a nice, clean way to do it where the person who had to find the body was going to be, have an easy time of it. So I thought, okay, well, until I can figure that out, I'm not doing it. About 2 days later was my birthday, and a video came on pyramid building. And it was like, so you talk about awakenings. Well, there's another weird thing I've had in my life, and that's what I would classify as computer downloads. Moments where like literally the universe stuck a USB stick in my head and just fired like tons of information in there beyond what I could fathom. And that's what happened when I watched this video. I mean, there was nothing in the video itself that was telling me anything, but it was like a lightning bolt hit my head. And at the end of that, I just said, I have to get to ancient Egypt and I have to be in the Great Pyramid because it's going to start answering questions. But before I did that, I took about 4 years to really study ancient Egypt in a really deep way. I took some time with some native medicine men. I took time with a Zen monk from Korea, with some Qigong teachers from China. I mean, I went anywhere I could go where I thought somebody had answers for me or had some information, I went and listened to them and did what they suggested, found out for myself, did it work or didn't it work? And by the time I got to Egypt, finally, after, I guess it was 5 or 6 years, I'd been to Mexico, studied the Mayan stuff there. And then when I got to Egypt, there was another computer download. So literally, I went from one download, which was like almost, I then spent 7 years, you might say, catching up to it. Like I wasn't learning in the 7 years. I was just reopening what the download put into me. Then I went in the Great Pyramid the first time and it happened again. Bizarrely, I had this the best way I can describe it is I split in two when I walked into the Great Pyramid. Oh, you don't walk, you crawl in, right? But as I was crawling into the king's chamber, I was also already in the king's chamber watching me come in. So and it was so disorienting that I forgot about it for a long time. I literally just forgot the experience. I remembered the download part of it and the change that was happening, but I'd forgotten this experience for a while because it just indicated that the person I've seen in the mirror all my life that's not me. It's got to be something else because I can see myself. So this really also began this process of shaking up so much. I'll finally answer your question now, which was that entire process of studying ancient Egypt indicated to me that the archaeologists are not anywhere telling the truth, that the ancient world was an unbelievable place of power, of knowledge, of wisdom, of mathematics, of geometry, of energy, of balance, of all sorts of these things. And the what is there does not in any way match the story of how they try to tell you the things were created.
What do you think that is? Do you think they just don't want people to discover that they have all this power within ourselves?
Yes, I would say that would be, I asked the same question myself. Like once it became clear that when you see, I took some people a few years ago to Egypt and showed them there's so many great stones all over the place to tell the story, but there's some on the Giza Plateau that are perfectly rounded, sculpted granite. Literally, you would need like a diamond laser cutter today to be able to make the kind of the surface curves and the smoothness of the surface. And of course, they'll tell you this was made with copper tools, which is impossible because you need a diamond laser cutting tool to do it today. And once you begin to recognize that anybody with any kind of sight would have to obviously, it's just so obvious that the story can't be right, then it obviously means somewhere at the top, that's the story they want. And yes, if the human being, and this will take us later into the World's Fairs and what came out of those, but if the average human being thinks that the people in the past were primitive and stupid and savages and, just lucky to survive, but we are so fantastic and advanced and great because of our iPhones and our washing machines and our cars, then we won't ever start thinking, hey, wait a minute, maybe these people in the past lived in a completely different way than we did. Maybe they lived with much more power and way more healthy and happier. Why aren't we doing that? And that's the thing that the group that controls everything here, they don't want people looking to times when things may have been different in a much more positive way for humans. And like you say, that doesn't come from aliens landing. It comes from quite simply the inner power of the human being, the inner power of the mind. When that gets actually released, turned into something really directed and positive, the world can be quite a different place. And that's what I think is trying to be taken away from people.
Yeah, I used to watch Ancient Aliens a lot, and for a while I was just buying into it. Aliens did this, aliens did that, and It conflicted with my upbringing because I went to church up until I was about 12 years old. So my entire from 2 to 12, that's all I knew was just religion. And so we would touch on different subjects and talk about the pyramids and all this stuff. And I had always wondered, how the heck were we able to build these massive structures with just slaves? They would just show people with whips, and we're supposed to believe that we hauled all this material and had this precision. And I'm just a little kid, so I just kind of kept my mouth shut, but it was always in the back of my mind. And then, Ancient Aliens was like, oh, it was alien. There's this whole possibility that aliens were here once long ago. And, after a while, I stopped believing all those stories. And then I kind of stumbled across you, and then this whole Tartaria stuff and mud floods. And that's making a lot more sense to me now.
Yeah, I mean, actually, Ancient Aliens isn't that? It's a fairly decent show from the standpoint of that they take you to a lot of sites around the world. There's places I had never even heard of. I studied this stuff for 20 years, and I'd sometimes watch a place, go, "What is this? How did I not know about this place?" But then if you just take the information as information, and then, like you say, don't have to agree with the assumption that the show produces, then it's fine. But like anything, as soon as there's a non-human answer for it, you have to start wondering, why is that? Because why can't humans have done this? What's wrong with the human power that they can't do these kind of things? And like I say, I spent time with some Native Indian medicine men, like not the ones that you meet in a workshop, like the real ones who still live on the reserve and don't go anywhere. And some of the stuff these men and women can do was pretty damn spectacular. And so it was also by meeting people like this that helped me to realize that what I was feeling and learning about the ancient world was obviously very true. And a whole lot of it has to do with understanding the use of energy in this realm. I don't want to make this sound new agey or something like that. I just mean from the standpoint of harnessing the energy that's here in really useful ways. And I think that's what these ancient sites were doing. I've come to see the Earth. It doesn't matter whether it's round or it's flat. It doesn't really matter, right? But I've come to see the Earth as like the same as the human body. So it has energy meridians that run through it. And just like an acupuncturist, they know where to put the needle. If you've got a sore knee, it's nowhere near your knee. It's somewhere else, but it helps the knee, right? By hitting the right meridian. I think these ancient sites were similar things. They're like acupuncture needles placed on the Earth, which are doing things to the energy of the meridians. And if you can go to the site with the right, let's call it, I don't want frequency either. Again, sounds new agey. If you go with the right mindset, you can tap into the very same thing that they.
Uh-oh, we lost him.
Some form. So it's like the possibility is still there for people today.
It says my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you fine.
Okay. Very interesting. Yeah, I've been having all kinds of issues since yesterday, and I can't figure out what it is. But
it could be because you're talking to me.
Yeah, I mean, some of these conversations are kind of taboo, and so it's just like what Napoleon Bonaparte said. He said history is a lie agreed upon, and anytime a victorious country comes in and wipes, wins a battle or wins a war, parts of history have been erased, and we don't know how far back our true history goes, because through wars, I've been finding out that bits and pieces are just being hidden and destroyed.
To be honest, now I used to think, okay, because I had done the Egypt stuff, and I had thought, and from that perspective, well, okay, the ancient world is a complete lie. That's totally wrong, completely. But modern history, say the last 300 or 400 years, I still kind of believe that, sort of. I still believed, okay, there's a Napoleon, there's a Battle of Waterloo, there was this, there was Gettysburg, there was, whatever. I believed all that. And I may not believe the interpretation, like you say, but I wouldn't have ever questioned that there was one. After I went through all the stuff in the World's Fairs, and after I saw that just 130, 40 years ago, everything being presented about that period on every level is a complete and total lie. And as I began to see that everything that was based on in the 1800s before that was a lie, I now think pretty much all history, say before the 1950s, almost guaranteed is like in the lie category. And then since the 1950s, you're probably sitting at maybe a half and half truth and reality kind of thing. And so we're still not even batting over 50% with what we've got now. But I would now say all the stuff I used to take true. I would at least, if someone told me, hey, World War I didn't happen or something, I would have, you're crazy. But now I'd have to go, actually, I don't know. I mean, really, I actually don't know. And even by trying to study certain pieces of information, it really, maybe it did, maybe it didn't, maybe it happened sort of, but didn't happen. So it has completely revamped my ideas. And why is that important? And somebody said, okay, well, why does it matter? Because the present that we all live is based on history. Whatever is happening in our present, particularly the way government and society is structured, when somebody says, well, why do we have that? Why do we have a government? Why is our school system like this? Why does our law system operate like this? There will always be an answer of, well, 200, 300 years ago, the world was like this. Some people made these changes, or there was this war, this thing changed, these things developed, and here's why we have our society. Oh, okay, I understand. So history is actually the foundation point of everything you do or experience in your society. And if you can't change your society, if the history is locked solid, it's really strange. If the history actually beats the change of the society. But as soon as you can potentially change history, then all of a sudden say, well, then why are we doing this in the law system if history was really like this? This is crazy. Things would change immediately. And that's why the control of history and the control of what we would call a mythological narrative is so unbelievably important, because if you have the right narrative, then that's how you create the exact world, the exact society that is presented now.
Wow. So that's a good segue, because you did mention the expositions, the world fairs. How did you stumble across that whole rabbit hole, if you will?
Yeah, it's interesting because I had never heard of them before 2019, other than I knew there had been one in like Vancouver in 2010 that I didn't go to, and I remember Montreal had one in '67. This big, the baseball team was named after it, and I knew they were big events, but I didn't really. Okay, Expositions, big deal. And I was in Florence in 2019, and I was studying the cathedrals. I was going through looking for how are these things built as energy structures? How does the energy work in the cathedrals? And I was beginning to see them that, oh yeah, these aren't religious structures. These are actually energy creation devices. And once you kind of knew where to go in the various cathedrals, it's almost like you would get healed instantly. Like if my back was sore, or my knee was bad, and I just stood in the right place, boom, it would be gone. The pain would just disappear. So I was really studying this hard. And again, I had another one of these downloads. I didn't know what it was, but it was like, again, the lightning hit me. And I came back home and I was studying again these cathedrals, and somehow I bumped into one of these World's Fair videos at on time, it might have been one by John Levy. He had kind of been one of the sort of the originators of this, a lot of this material. But it was on the Chicago Exposition of 1893. And I started looking at the buildings, and it was just beyond staggering. And of course, they were all cathedral-like, but on massive scales. And then as I began reading that, they were doing this again and again and again all over the world. The Chicago World's Fair was 700 acres. The St. Louis Exposition was 1,200 acres of buildings, all supposed to be built in 2 years to have this giant exposition that loses millions of dollars. None of them ever made any money. And then as soon as they were over, the buildings were all destroyed and chucked into landfills. And then they went to a new place and did it again. And once I had studied this for about 3 weeks, I just said, how can you not write a book on this? Like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And I wasn't looking too far ahead. I was just going to write on the craziness, right? But as you got into the craziness, it got crazier and crazier and crazier as you began to go bigger and bigger into the cities and the builders and the stories around it and the everything that involved whatever these fairs were. And I began to see, oh my God, these fairs are not just fairs. There's something much, much bigger. And so that's how it came about. It came about from again, this thing that happened in Florence and this realization of this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And how come no one's writing a book about it? I better do that.
Wow. I have a friend of mine who builds, these like incredible houses up in Hollywood Hills. And, a lot of these projects for, a couple of $1 million homes, it would take him a year and a half to build. And so to believe that these giant 700, 1,200 square, yard, 1,200 yard expositions were acres that were being built within a span of 2 years. That's just technologically impossible without having thousands of people, crews. And then not to mention that there's no infrastructure. The technology back then were like horse and buggy and cowboys, basically, hauling all this material around. And we're expected to believe that all these things were built in under 2 years. It's crazy.
Have you taken the stuff, like the pictures of the World's Fair, to him and asked what he's thought of it?
I haven't talked to him about it yet. I've been meaning to have that conversation with him because he's probably going to move out here to Texas, and I want him to really look into this and like blow his mind.
Right, because that's what I did. I went to a building contractor before I went too deeply into the research and decided, should I really write this or not? I'll go see some building contractors and see what they say. And when I first showed them, I didn't tell them what they were looking at, right? I just showed them pictures of the exposition. And I remember saying, what is this? What city is this? And it's like, I've been like there. I live here in Norway. And so these people here travel all over Europe. And like, I've been all over Europe. I've never seen anything like this. Well, it's not in Europe. That's Chicago in 1893. Like, what do you mean that's Chicago? And as I began explaining and telling him the story, he was, and then the big part was I asked him, I said, okay, can you build this? Could you build this for me today? Like right now, today, if I had, unlimited money and I asked you to build this, could you? He said, yes, we could build this. And I said, what would it take you? He said, well, I'd probably need a 50,000 man crew, and I would need 2 years for the planning, because this is going to be an unbelievably difficult project. You've got canals and waterways and electrical trains and moving sidewalks. I mean, you've got a tremendous amount of planning plus all these buildings. So give me 2 years for that. Then give me 2 years to dig out all the waterworks and support the buildings and get all that done. And then give me about 10 to 12 years for the buildings. So 15 years, give or take, with modern machinery, modern equipment, and a 50,000 man workforce. And again, I told him, well, they did this in 2 years, in 1891 to 93. And his only response was, not possible.
Wow.
And this is a person who does this for a living, And then when I showed him the photos of the construction sites, this where it got even better. So particularly the St. Louis World's Fair has tons of supposed construction photos, and some, I have to admit, are honestly construction photos. Like, I don't think, some people have thought they think I say they found the entire exposition as it is and just dug it out or something and painted it. And no, they built a lot of it. They actually did build a lot of these things. My contention is they didn't build all of it. But when I showed them the construction photos, particularly of the big buildings, it's usually just the building in the background, scaffolding on it, no workmen, no nothing, just the scaffolding in the building. And his first response of looking at the pictures, well, I don't know what I'm looking at, but first of all, there's no building materials. Like, you can't be building anything, even in the scaffolding, without a stack of wood and a whole bunch of stuff close by. 2, there's no road. How come there's no road to bring your materials in and out? I mean, one of the first things you do before you build the building is you build a road to be able to move the stuff in and out. 3, there isn't a coffee cup on the ground anywhere. There isn't a sandwich wrapper. 4, there's no bathrooms. You got tens of thousands of people. Where are these people going to the bathroom? All he said to me is, I don't know what this is, but nobody's been on this site for at least 2 to 3 years. Wow. So it was when I finished this conversation with him that I realized, oh boy, I've stumbled on something pretty huge, actually.
So what's your analysis on the purpose of these world fairs? What were they designed to originally do?
It's hard to say, because again, my contention, like, to answer that question of how could they do this in 1891, how could they actually build them? Because again, if nobody has seen the pictures, just go on the internet, look up the Chicago Exposition or the Buffalo World's Fair or the St. Louis and see the buildings. I mean, they're staggering. They're just staggeringly beautiful and ornate and the story that they're built with a thing called staff, which is a type of plaster and wooden frame, doesn't make sense when you're building things like 390-foot high electrical tower in Buffalo, because you don't want that crashing down on people who are going to the top of it. So it's pretty obvious these are pretty solid structures that they're building. Right. So it means there's only 2 answers. Either 1, they had a technology they're not supposed to have, and they did something like 3D print the buildings or whatever, right? They must have had some kind of technology. Or the major buildings were already there and they didn't have to build them, they just fixed them up. If it's the second one that's true, then it means that's from some sort of highly advanced ancient civilization that was all over the world. Luckily, because these were happening in the United States and Australia and etc., there wasn't supposed to be a civilization of European colonials, so it can't explain the buildings having come from, like, you couldn't say Budapest. Well, they've been building for 1,000 years. You're not supposed to have that in Philadelphia. So it meant that there had to have been if that's true, there had to be a civilization much, much further back that resembled ancient Rome or resembled ancient Greece all over the world. And if that were the case, then you've got this thing, well, the fairs look like they're doing two things. One, they're covering up and removing the memory of this ancient, highly technologically advanced civilization, but not technology as we know, the technology of energy. And at the same time, it looks like we hear this word being thrown around so much today, reset. This is the big word. And I used the word in my book in early 2019 before any of this stuff happened. And when the first time that came on the news, I got, like, my skin got really goose pimply, like, oh no, because that's a word that is kind of used by members of the alternate history community to describe a time somewhere in the 1800s where there seemed to have been some sort of reset where humanity was, in some cases, you might say, wiped out, and a whole new thing was started. And the World's Fairs seem to be the starting point of the new human experience, the one you and I know, the one that you and I have experienced, you might say, was born at the time of the World's Fairs. And these fairs would have been like the propaganda ministry of explaining, because they had huge areas of them that were not just technology, but were history. So all of the history we know of were probably invented and presented at the time of the fairs. Science was invented and presented at the time of the fairs. All of this stuff. So as you went into the detail, I think these were like before television, before movies, before all of this stuff. This was the way to, you might say, get a population to think a certain way, was use these fairs as the movement point going forward. That's what I would believe they are.
Yeah, because when people went to these fairs, they left with some sort of certificate to, kind of like, you've graduated. You have all this information, and you are now part of this new society. Yeah,
they got diplomas. So it's the weirdest thing. You would get a diploma on your exiting from the World's Fair. What did you graduate from? What diploma? Got to be kidding. And what was really weird is, which fair was it? One of the early ones, like Buffalo, St. Louis, you had photographic ID. You were given a badge with photo ID. How advanced is this? You've got photo ID for the World's Fair. Then the one in Chicago, it had an electric train. So if they could have an electric train running around the entire World's Fair, and then there are no electric vehicles pretty much, for the next 150 years. Well, what happened to that? The more I would dig into it, the weirder it got. And if anyone's really interested, there's a website called studylove.org, I think it is. And this person has literally put all of the links to everything about the fairs all in one site. You have to look for it. It's when you go to his homepage, it's hard to find. I think you have to go /World's Fairs or something to find it. But like, if you click into any of the World's Fairs, he'll list what the weirdest thing was. After every one of these fairs, right after it, the year after, there would be 7 or 8 books written about it by historians of the day. And these books are like 8,000 pages long. There were travel guides for all of these World's Fairs. So like Rand McNally and these again are like 1,000 pages long. They detail every exhibit, everything that's in one place, every restaurant, these things are so massive and incredible. And the literature on it just blows your mind when you actually see what was at these things. It's like, wow. And then they just burn the thing to the ground and just forget about it. It's mind bending. And sorry if I just keep rambling like this, but like,
oh no,
here's Chicago in 1893. It's supposed to had this fire in 1871. It's supposed to have destroyed a lot of the city. So you build all of these giant buildings. You'd think you'd need some buildings after having these fires. why would you want to just destroy them right away? Like San Francisco, earthquake, 1906. So they actually, where they built the World's Fair, supposedly built it, was the area of San Francisco where a lot of homeless people were still sleeping because they didn't have anywhere to live. They had no buildings yet for them to live. So they kicked them all out of there, built the fair, and then tore the whole thing down. Wouldn't you keep some of the buildings because you were homeless people? There were supposed to be people from the earthquake that needed a place to live. Here's some buildings. Why don't you let them live there? So every part of these stories is just more and more insane. So it's obviously, it doesn't take much to realize, well, it's a lie. What's true is hard to know, but it's obviously a lie.
I think a lot of the government buildings, where they have, the courthouses and stuff, and the Capitol buildings all over, and the city Capitol buildings, I think those they could possibly be the remnants of that old civilization, because these structures are so massive and huge. There's one here in Dallas, and we drove by, and it is a courthouse, but if you Google it, the top dome is being blurred out. So I find that very peculiar. And I tried to research, and I can't find the original building date. They only have a restoration date of like 1925. But beyond that, it's a kind of a big mystery, and it's like in the middle of nowhere, basically. It's in a small town called Rockwall, and it's in the middle of nowhere. It's like, why would anybody build this giant structure? And like, what else was here before that?
Yeah. That's one thing that people in the United States have a great opportunity for is, any state capitol building, particularly if you live in the Midwest. That's a really good place to go. If you're in Kansas or Iowa or North Dakota or something, go look at your state capitol building, and then go look at the construction date, which might have been like, 1840 or 1850 or 60 or something, and then say, but there's no people living here. There's a very small amount of cowboys and people that have moved out to the West. And this is one of the first things you want to build, is this. And if you do get some early photos of these buildings, of these Capitol buildings, again, there's no road. Right. So you're bringing in this massive amount of stone and materials, and you don't think, I'm going to take a couple of days and build a road to make the transportation, as you say, and horse and buggy, that's really tough transport of stone. I think a road might be a good idea. It's only going to take you a week or two. Put a road in, and then the rest of no road. We don't want that. We're just going to build this. So again, you've got these Capitol buildings that are right there where you live that you probably never really thought about, and go look at it again, and then start thinking, 1844, how did they build this? How was this? Where did they get the material from? How did they transport it here? How was this built like this? Who actually was able to build this in this particular location in 1844? It's kind of crazy when you really start to think about it, and then again realize, how many times have you driven past this and never laid a thought of wondering about it in the least? It's amazing. Yeah. It's like the last 5 years, there's been some kind of weird zeitgeist in this historical time period of these buildings that kind of like, for some reason, the whole world's, or not the whole world, but a large number of the world's population has kind of said, wait a minute, this is a story worth looking at. And like if I wrote this book 5 years ago, I bet you very few people would have read it. I bet you I wouldn't be doing interviews. It wouldn't have led to a YouTube channel. It would have just been a casual interest that today somebody would have gone back and read. But now, for whatever, this is the kind of, or has been anyway, you might call it the flavor of the month. And I just kind of got lucky that I wrote into it at the time I did.
Yeah, I don't know how I came across your video series. And I don't know if it was the story about the Cathars that came first. That in itself is a whole interesting story as well. It makes a lot of sense that the Catholic religion has really just hijacked most of mainstream religion, and that why would they want to wipe out the Cathars? To have a crusade to wipe them out. Like, what were they spreading? What information were they spreading that they just didn't want anybody to know?
Yeah, or what powers did they have that they were afraid of? Again, I see a lot of this idea of if you kind of take history in some cases of there are groups that have power and knowledge and ability, and that's not what, if you're trying to control a population, you don't want people accessing the deepest parts of your power. And one of the first things you'd want to do is eliminate those that can, so that there's nobody you can go to and kind of, tap on the shoulder and say, hey, can you tell me how you do that? If they're not here anymore, it right. doesn't take too many generations to get lost. I mean, the native Indians that I knew, the medicine men I knew, always told me that for whatever we can do today, it's nothing compared to the ones 500 years ago used to know, before the whites came here, and they would say, and the sad thing is what they knew we've lost. We don't know it anymore. It's been, well, all we have is what we have. And I think that's very similar to in a lot of things around the world. So when you look at the Cathars, that story of, the giant genocide, right? The complete wiping out of a population of southern France. But then you get the story, but then 100 years later, the same thing happens to the Knights Templar. Well, and the Knights Templar are, it's almost, once I started into the story, I started realizing, well, they're not separate. You don't just have one century and then one the other century. And these two groups were so interlinked in southern France, I began to see the Knights Templar were one part of the group and the Cathars were like another part of it, but they're the same group. They're not really different. Right. And maybe the two events happened all at the same time, that there wasn't one event and then another event. There was just one event that they've split up to try to confuse people as to what really happened. So it's not just, you have to know, well, what did the Cathars know that they wanted to get rid of? You have to ask, well, what did the Knights Templar know that they wanted to get rid of? And this opens a whole, because that takes you into the potential of the Holy Grail and what all of these things might really be. And that too is fascinating stories. And again, that was another part of history that I began pulling apart and saying, oh boy, here's another one that's, got to get torn to shreds.
Yeah. The story of the Cathars, how you told the, what they knew and what they were preaching, and just going around and just letting people know, because they were kind of like nomads, but they were doing their own kind of preaching and kind of like the secrets of the world. Like, this is just your vessel, and this is going to lead to, being closer to the higher spirit. And once you pass on, like, instead of being reincarnated, you go towards something else. I mean, it's such a fascinating topic. And
it is. And it's hard because we don't really know much of what the Cathars actually believed or taught, because all of that stuff was burned. So most of what we get from the Cathars directly is, the Catholic Church's presentation of them. So of course the winners are writing the story. So of course they're always going to portray them differently than the truth. Exactly. The closest you're probably going to get to knowing what's really going on with them would be to read like the Nag Hammadi Gnostic fragments. That those are probably as close to Cathar thought as you can get. And if we boil it down to some of the people listening on this cast, it's if you had to simplify some Cathar ideas, probably, and again, I can't say like anything, I don't know for sure. Like even with the World's Fairs, like, I don't know what the World Fairs really are. I just make a guess. I know what they weren't, but Cathars are another thing. So they're one of their main beliefs is that the world itself is evil, that the material world is evil because it was created not by what they would call the real God. It was created by the Old Testament God, is how they would describe it. So everything in this reality is evil, including the physical body. And your task is to disassociate with the material world completely, or as you do as little as you possibly can in it, live completely without fear, with the idea that you transcend the evil world by moving then into the world of the real God. They would see Jesus, for example, the story being completely incorrect is told by the Christians, because God could not be born into flesh, because as soon as you would be born into flesh, you would be of the devil world, so you would be evil. So in that case, Jesus would have to be evil. The only way the Jesus story works in their idea would be to say, well, he was like a hologram. He would have been like a mental projection into this world, so that means he's not actually physical matter, so therefore he can't be evil, and therefore therefore is followable and listen toable. So just these ideas just begin to tear apart the potentialities of normal religion, but at the same time keep the religious text and the religious idea totally. It doesn't destroy it doesn't destroy the New Testament. It just takes you to potentially looking at it in a completely different way. And they lived in a sense of equality, of men and women were completely equal. Both were priests, both were teachers, both were healers, so they had this unbelievably different way of being and living and seeing. Like, they called themselves true Christians. That's how they described themselves. They didn't see themselves as non-Christian. They just saw themselves as what they called original Christians, you might say. And they were against what they thought was the false Christianity that was happening in Rome. And that's, if I simplify the Cathar story, that's it. And then for some reason, finally, combination of the King of France and the Pope and various other organizations decided it's time to get rid of these people. And they did, and for the most part, they did. Of course, you would never get rid of all of them. Some of it moved on, survived, maybe even made it into the early Rosicrucian text and made it into the Grail stories. Because the stories of the Holy Grail are all written at the very time that the Cathars are just starting this crusade against the Cathars, which is also very interesting. Why does the Grail stories want to be written at the time of these Cathar crusades? So there's no doubt they're all linked. The information is linked, and there is truth there. It's just hard to figure out what it is.
Wow. So you think that this whole spiritual warfare it's been going on for hundreds of years, and do you believe that we're kind of like at the cusp of this spiritual warfare? Because I feel like people are more detached from, I don't even believe that God is who we think He is. That's all part of the spiritual warfare, is being detached from our spiritualness, and just
it's a tough thing to try to describe, because there's when you see reality as dreamlike, or as a story, or as a movie, not as a real reality. Once you've had that experience, that reality is not what you think it is, then what you might call a spiritual warfare, a control of, if we simplify it and say it easy, control of human attention and perception. Mm-hmm. That if we simplify it down, that's really what's going on for hundreds of years, is trying to control what you perceive, what you believe you perceive, therefore what your hopes, dreams, fears, and everything else are, and control your perception, how you're associating with the world. That, if we simplify it. So that's been going on for a long period of time, and does seem to be amplifying.
Yeah.
On the other token, though, it's weird, because you have to see that as what is going on, but the realization at the same time of it's also another distraction point. It's also this idea of getting tied into what's happening in reality, as opposed to what's happening inside of me. What is this me thing? What is the me thing experiencing and feeling? What is it going through? And the more external, in any time, as soon as the world gets crazy, well, you get focused on it. Obviously, that's natural, dealing with the chaos in the world. So the more chaos external, the less likely you're going to be able to go in and know what's going on inside of you. So it also would, on the flip side of this, must mean, this is the good part of it, while the spiritual warfare that's going on is really, really harsh, and I can guarantee you, for the people that are going through it and are having to really stand in their humanness now, and stand in what they feel freedom is and what they feel is important to them, it's hard. And I know it's hard, and I'm sharing that with you. The other flip side of it is, if things are getting that hard, it must mean there's a doorway right now to something really, really deep and important within, that this whole game, you might say, is trying to keep you from. So bizarrely, things get harder when the potential opportunity gets greater.
Yeah. I've noticed that with, this whole lockdown, when it all began, and my wife and I were watching television, and we felt that anxiety, that fear just overcoming us. And as soon as we turned off the television, we started to feel slowly back to normal. Like we had less anxiety and we can think clearer. And then I just had this like epiphany. I'm like, we need to get out of California. This is not going to get any better. And I was telling my friends, I'm like, you know what? You need to store up food. You need to get out of this state. And some people took my warning, and some people just, hoped and believed that everything was just going to get better. And, I'm glad I left when we did, because we would probably be homeless right now had we stayed. And, our kind of like our sanctuary away from there is Texas, but I don't know how long that's going to last. We may have to relocate somewhere else, but, can only run so much before you have to just accept and just be, find answers outside of ourselves. And, I don't know what the answer is. I'm still discovering, and my mind's just as open as I can possibly be,
Yeah, that's I think the biggest step that's happening now is there's always an opportunity to go within, and trauma and difficulty. I wasn't looking within until the stuff happened with my father and Joan was murdered and whatever. Once life gets tough, you either deny it, drown it out, drink yourself into oblivion, whatever, or you start looking to the only place that you know who to talk to, that's yourself, right? You start having these really deep conversations of what's going on, what's happening, what am I feeling, why have I always thought like this, and you can really, and that's of course the doorway to anything. The power and the knowledge we all seek is where we are. It's within us. It's always been there. It's just we've been distracted since birth to keep looking outside for everything else. It's that everything we need is external to us when really it's internal. Mm-hmm. And so again, that's what I feel. I feel like as I've been watching the world get crazier and crazier, more and more people though that I've come to see that might get certain realizations or awakenings or whatever that might take 5 years, it might take them 5 months now. Because everything is intensified, and it's starting to be like, if I can't go if I can't even go to the grocery store and feel safe and feel like normal and sane, well, the only place I have that opportunity is me. So get out in the forest, sit with a tree, and see what's going on inside of me. And it's also been interesting that the ones that have done that, those kinds of, not that specifically, but those kinds of things have had great jumps of understanding, because the external world has pushed them to the place they've kind of been forgetting to look at all of this time themselves.
Yeah, you can't find yourself being trapped in a 10 by 10 wall watching television. You're just going to be programmed to believe whatever they want you to believe. I mean, the programming is just, when you step away, you can see the mind control, and you can see the narrative and the agenda behind everything that they're all saying. And so you just become more aware of it once you step away from all the technology, which is why I barely post anything on social media. And it's such a hard thing for me to do, because I know I need to do it to promote this stuff. But at the same time, I'm like, I really don't want to look at this garbage, because it's not real,
Yeah, and sorry, I just lost my train of thought. What were we talking about before the social media? Just before that, you were saying,
the whole reality of being locked up in a room and watching television.
Oh yeah, the television thing. Did you by chance watch my video on that I did on Jerry Mander's book on the what he called the 4 reasons, or the 4 reasons to end television, or something like that?
I don't think so. I think for a moment you were posting so many videos
you should go back and look at that one. Yeah, Jerry Mander wrote a book way back in the 1970s that basically said why not only should you stop watching television, why you should eliminate it completely from society in the 1970s.
Wow.
And the stuff he said, now you take that to computers and screens and whatever else, it was mind-blowing. And beyond even the things you're talking about of conditioning and programming and the way things are manipulating the mind, there was so many levels to what he had found, the actual television itself was doing, it was an amazing read, and I put it into like 20 or 30 minutes of video to try to present it to people, because it was like, wow. And yeah, it's I don't know, but when I was a kid, I watched a lot of television, and I wonder, here's one for you, just for fun. Try to think of, say, any sport you played or something like that, or a music group you were with or something. Can you remember like all the names of the people that you were on a baseball team you had or something when you were like 10?
No.
Start thinking of various commercials that you listened to that you saw when you were 10 years old. I bet you'll remember all the jingles.
Oh, yeah. Whenever I hear a song, I can remember where I was at that moment when I first heard it, or if I see a commercial, I can remember. Yeah, you're right. It's so programmed in our brains.
And like I did that once, and I could go through. I didn't remember the commercials, but I remembered the little taglines.
Yeah, I have a hard time remembering.
Meow, meow, meow. It's in your brain forever.
I barely have. I have a hard time remembering the people who I graduated high school with.
Right.
Like, I'll go on to like the classmates, and I'm like, I don't remember these people. I mean, for one, we all like look completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's just an example of how conditioned television really is. How much our view of the world and our view of everything has been shaped being a television generation. We have, and you didn't realize it at the time, that what you were watching on TV was not just entertaining you, it was making you think certain ways, making you believe certain things, making you the good guy always wins, or just anything about government or the police or lawyers, or it doesn't matter what it was always presenting a general idea to you that you didn't even know you're being conditioned with.
Yeah, and I feel like, because those expositions, like a lot of, they were like building, I don't know, I think you mentioned that they were kind of like the source of like racism almost, that they had like different buildings that represented each culture from around the world. And then at the same time, they were like, you had to have so much money to go into these workshops and to earn this diploma.
Well, some of the things they had at these, we'll go back to the fairs here. The things why I say the fairs were like an indoctrination or a creation of the story of the life we've known, is because let's just get some water. Besides the fun stuff here. Someone's afraid of what I'm going to say. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Center myself. Wow, this is wild.
Something's preventing me from speaking.
Something important is coming.
Yeah.
So, beyond the technology that these fairs were presenting, and they were trying to present this brand new spangled technology of what was coming in the world. Like you said, they had these things they known as midways, amusement areas. In the amusement areas, usually had two specific things. One would be a human zoo. And it would be, yes, they would bring primitives from all over the world. So they would bring various native Indian tribes. They would bring Zulus from Africa. They would bring pygmies from here. They'd bring early people from the Philippines. And they would be displaying them as savages. They would display them as the early people that you evolved from, right? Almost like to the point of animals. At the Buffalo World's Fair, they had the Indians at that fair. They forced them to slaughter 7,000 dogs in the Coliseum and then eat them.
Wow.
500 dogs, I guess, is what they slaughtered. But 7,000 people came to watch it. 7,000 people came to pay money to watch Native Indians slaughter 500 dogs and eat them in the Colosseum. These are the kind of things that are being presented. They had things like the old plantation at many of these fairs, which were trying to show how much fun it was to have been a black slave on the plantation. So you've got this portion of the fair, which is another one, which this is bizarre. They had them at a lot of fairs, but I think they started this in maybe Nashville, at the Nashville Fair or something. But the Smithsonian would have an exhibit of skulls. And it would show, of course, the primitive skull all the way to the Victorian skull, which would be bigger. As the skulls get bigger. And then they would have a measuring device to measure your head so that you could see where on the evolutionary scale you were. Were you primitive or were you the advanced Victorian, right? So you've got this whole bizarre, racist presentation going on. Meanwhile, you've got these giant areas of history. And they are presenting history on a massive scale. In St. Louis at the World's Fair, I've said this a few times, but on their midway, they had 25 exhibits. They required 100,000 actors, and they relived everything. So if you went to ancient Rome, I think they had 3,000 or 4,000 actors portraying as gladiators, as whatever you wanted to see of ancient Rome, they had that. At the one that comes to mind is Jerusalem. They recreated 22 streets of the old city of Jerusalem, including the old sites, including the temples, including the supposed stable where Jesus is born. They brought like 10,000 people or something, 5,000 people from Jerusalem to be actors and work the restaurants, work the streets, work the exhibits. They had ones like this for the Siberian train. You could go to the German Alps, you could go to Paris, you could go to Spain, you could go to the old St. Louis, you could go and watch fights in the Boer War. The scale of this was just gigantic. I mean, it's like bigger than Disneyland.
Yeah.
And that's just the historical part of the St. Louis World's Fair. And how could you not, under those circumstances and those times, have gone to something like that, seen the description of ancient Rome or the description of life in Paris in the Middle Ages and think that can't be correct? Of course, you would come across from there thinking, now I know what ancient Rome was like. I didn't just see it, I experienced it. I interacted, I didn't just watch a documentary. You literally would have had the experience in your mind of being in ancient Rome, and the ancient Rome they wanted you to believe was ancient Rome. It's mind-boggling when you look at the scale of it, of what they did at these fairs, and that's why I start to think, what an easy way to create and manipulate history going forward. Because, like you say, only the rich could, or the well-off could go to these fairs because they were so expensive. The entry fee was cheap, but to do anything cost a lot of money. So, of course, all the school teachers would be there, all the university professors, anybody who had any kind of connection to any key part of society. So the very people who would have become the authority figures to describe whatever they experienced at the fair, the next people, whether it's the children or their executives or the people in the company, well, they'd have to believe them. They've just been to the World's Fair. How could the World's Fair be wrong? And it's an amazing thing when you see it. And this is happening, of course, right at the same time. You've got these bizarre orphan trains happening all over the United States, right?
Just about to bring that up.
Yeah, you've got these orphans, tens of thousands of orphans in these eastern cities that they put on trains and take them to the West. And like, well, where are these orphans coming from? Like, what's happening to all these adults in the East that you've got tens of thousands of orphans that they can just ship around the country? And at the exact same time, they're supposedly building these giant insane asylums all over the U.S. and the world, in fact, they're bigger and more beautiful than the Medici palaces of Florence, or they're almost at the equivalent of the Vatican. And it's like, one, why do you need so many insane asylums? Who is going insane like this? And what's the story? And why do you need to make them look like palaces? So, but given that the story that both of these things are also going on at the exact same period of the fairs indicates they're all connected. They're all connected, and it's all part of some gigantic hidden narrative that's been tried to be wiped out of the storyline for a long time.
Yeah, so they were using these fairs as reprogramming centers. So whatever you knew before that, or all those children who came from those orphanages didn't have a lot of foundation, so they could just send them to these classes, relearn history how we want to present it, and if they had any questions, they could just fix these certain points and rewrite history in real time.
Perfect. So, you've pretty much, I think, nailed it right on. Again, this is only my theory, because I can't. It's so hard as you go back in time to be able. Anyone who says I know history, I know the truth about it, they can't know the truth, because we don't have a time machine, and we don't have the actual video footage of everything that went on. We have only what we have pieces of, and you can try to do the best you can. But this gives us a really good idea of if it's a reset that's trying to be put through now, we can get a bit of an idea of what that might look like if we look back to what's potentially the last reset. This is why this period is so important. That's why I feel the book I wrote is so important for right now. Is okay, right. If you want to get rid of a huge part of society, and then you want to reshape and recontrol what's left, first thing you'd want is a lot of children. Because like you say, children don't have a lot of experience and knowledge of very much. They will believe what they're told, particularly from an authority figure, particularly if they're coming out of trauma. Whatever historical figures or authority figure is going to give them information on any subject, and they're finally feeling safe, of course they're going to automatically believe it. So within one generation, that will be the story that's just passed on. When they become teachers, it's just easy to pass on that story. So one generation, you've got that. And then anybody who doesn't want to follow the story, or any adults that are still around that don't want to change the narrative, insane asylum. You're crazy. You still remember a time when you could go to these cathedrals and get healed, and you had these energies, and you had these star forts, and you're still remembering this stuff. Goodbye. And I don't see any difference of what could happen today, which is bring forth a new population, they might say, that's easy to program, and make sure the ones that still remember are not around.
Yeah. Well, I don't know where to take this conversation to next. I mean, there's so many things that we could possibly talk about. You're working on another book, right? Aren't you? About more about the history in France and like Pluto's cave and stuff.
Well, I was going to write the
Plato's
one
cave.
I was going to write the one on France, but to write it into a book I realized it was going to just take way more research than I could possibly afford at this time, given how crazy the world is, and how difficult travel is now impossible. You can't travel anyway to go there. That's why I thought I'd turn them into YouTube videos, because at the very least I can get the information out in sort of the early form that it's in, and release it. The Plato's Cave videos, which really surprised me by not only the level of interest they generated, but the incredible depth of knowledge that the comments were bringing up. To me, the comments on things like some of the Plato's Cave videos, and even some of the spiritual warfare videos, the later ones I've done, the community of people that have been coming to my YouTube channel are very highly knowledgeable, and I love reading the comments on those. And the basic premise is, of course, the story of Plato's cave, and being trapped in a false reality, and what happens if you decide to exit and leave. And if anything, I think if there's a new book, it might be a combination of the discussion after my death experience that I had in 2005, which I guess we haven't got to yet. I guess you had one as well, didn't you? Say you had a death experience? Yeah,
after hearing your story about your near-death experience, it made me remember that I had one myself that I had completely forgotten. And
yeah, so we'll talk about that in a second here. I'll just say, I think that if there's a new book, it'll be about the period after this death experience, how difficult that's been, how confusing that's been, and then bring in some of these Plato's cave ideas at the end of that to discuss the leaving. So let's talk about our death experiences. Why don't you lead us in?
Well, God, it happened, I was married before. This is about almost 20 years ago. And we were on our honeymoon up in Kauai. And I've only told one other person other than my wife being there. And we hadn't talked about it ever since. But we went at this like coral reef, and you know, it's supposed to be like a safe area for us, for people to swim. And I saw a sea turtle, and I just had snorkel gear, and so I dove down to try to like grab it and swim with it. And I found myself going too far. And I looked back up and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm really deep. So I tried to go back to the surface because I needed air. And right as I got close to the surface, I felt this tug, like someone actually grabbed my leg and was pulling me in. I immediately realized that it was an undertow. And I was swimming for, you know, thankfully I was very conditioned. I worked out every day. And, but there was a split second where I thought I wasn't going to make it. And this whole like feeling rushed through me, and it was like a cold sensation, and I almost froze, but I fought through it and was able to reach the surface, and I got a breath of air, but I was still submerged. And I just found just this inner strength, and I just swam as hard as I could. I kind of flattened out, and instead of struggling, I just worked on my body form. And next thing you know, I reached the surface, and I realized I'm about, 200-300 yards away, and I could see in the distance, and I'm waving my arms like help, help, and nobody can hear me. And I realized I had to swim back, and so I just put my head down, and thankfully I had a snorkel gear, because I would have definitely drowned. But as I got to the beach, and I was like on my hands and knees, I rolled over, and I was just exhausted. And my wife comes up to me, and she's like, "What the hell's wrong with you?" And I'm like, "I almost died." And she's like, "You're over exaggerating. Come lay down." And she just proceeded to go back to her spot, picked up their book, and continued reading. And then I tried to tell her, like, I really almost died. I got pulled under, and I was like 300 yards away. And she's like, "Nah, I think you're over exaggerating." So at that moment, I felt like a different person. And I realized at that moment that I'm not living the life that I should be living. And later I found out that she was pregnant. And so I decided, well, I can't just run. So I tried to stick it out for as long as I could, but it just seemed like ever since that point, because she didn't hear me out, she didn't believe that it happened. It almost made me believe that what I experienced wasn't reality, and that no one else saw it happen. So was that just in my head? Did that not happen? And it just felt like, all right, well, I'll just bury it down deep, and I just won't think about it. But my life had been changed ever since then. And so I had to, we eventually divorced, and I went through this like whole spiral, ended up getting in a car accident and getting on medication. I became kind of like an alcoholic, because I gained a bunch of weight, and I was drinking every day. And, it took a long time for me to come out of that hole. But in between that time, I had all these like weird awakenings, like, even though your life is screwed up, you took the right path. And, it wasn't even until, when I met my current wife, Glitter, and about 8 years ago, that things started to, get better. And finally, I'm like away from that distant part of my life where I just felt like I was in total chaos. And I just knew I wasn't meant to be, that part of my life wasn't meant to be the way it was, because I wasn't living for me. I felt like I was a completely different person. I was not doing anything I was supposed to be doing. I was just like, you go to school, you get married, you have kids, you get the white picket fence in the house. And I was like, this isn't me. I'm not meant to do this, And so I had been grappling with that whole truth for so long, and I kept it buried and never really talked about it, and until right now, which is.
So have you talked about it with your wife? Your current
Yeah,
wife?
she knows. Like this morning before I got in with you, I'm like, I'm gonna tell Howdie Mickoski and my audience, like, this is what happened to me, because I have never really healed from it and talked about it, and it's always been buried deep inside of me, because I was meant to believe it never happened, because it's just weird.
Yeah, I mean, you weren't validated the second it just you literally just survived, and you weren't validated, and so of course your mind is spinning at that point. You don't know how to handle it, and I'd be curious if I can ask a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
When you were when you were under the water and you were realizing, oh boy, I got a long way to go here. Do you remember if you had any thought, like actual mental thought, or if there was like something else was operating?
For a split second, which felt way longer, I felt, when I had that feeling, it kind of shot through my body like a lightning bolt. It almost felt like, this is it. This is how I'm going. And then another thought was like, am I okay with this? Am I going to be able to come through with it, or should I just accept it? And somehow I was like, all right, I can't just accept this. So I mean, like, I just felt like I had to fight, Yeah.
Because you've heard my story or seen some of it. That's why I'm asking those questions. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then, I wouldn't doubt that it was when you've just got through that, and there's this confusion going on, and like you say, this looking at my life as it is now, and who can you talk to about it, right? Who can you share the story? Who can you get some assistance from? If then, when there was no one, and particularly no one really soon after the event, of course you just probably bury it. But as soon as you bury it, it's just going to start building inside, and
I've had opportunities to talk to therapists about it, and for whatever reason, it never came out of me. Because I felt like whatever I say isn't gonna make me feel any better.
Right.
So I just left it, let it be. I didn't feel like talking about it.
Right.
I think
it's a powerful moment that you've done that, to a large number of people now, and know that it's okay. It's a powerful experience, and it can take years to understand and totally integrate. And that's a big help to others out there who may have had the same thing and maybe going through the exact same experience of, I'm not believing it, I don't want to talk about it, I want to hide from it. And this is a way of, same thing when I talk about it, it's trying to let people know it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to bring it out and look at it.
Right. When I was in the military, and I wasn't in for very long, I got out as quickly as I could. Because when I was witnessing people who I went to training with, and they were going off to war, and a few of them weren't coming back, and I started to have this like anxiety. Well, even during basic training and advanced training and all that, I started to feel this lack of control. It's like, all right, I just signed over my life to a government who I really don't believe in fighting for, because when I first signed up, I thought I was doing something courageous and great for the country. We had just, we were just attacked and all this stuff. But I felt like I was doing something, heroic. But then I realized that my life is no longer in my hands. And so I felt the mortality again, that same feeling that I felt when I was drowning. And I was like, I don't want any part of this. I want to get out. And then the base that I was stationed at, it was being shut down, and they gave me an opportunity to transfer and continue my service until the very end, or I could retire. I'm like, this is it. I'm retiring. I don't want any part of this. I want out. And that was the last time I had been involved in any kind of like military service. And I don't know.
Well, I know when I went through my death experience in 2005, which also involved water, as you know, it also involved the potential of drowning. And when I got into that river in the canyon and realized I'm probably not getting out, and fully accepted, a little similar to like you did there, that moment of acceptance of this is where I'm going to die,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay. I had no need to struggle. I had no need to. I looked at it's like, again, it's all happening in microseconds, right? Like huge amounts of information are happening in microseconds, and I just said, that's okay. I'm gonna die, and I'm just gonna have good seats to watch it. Okay. And once that happened, and the struggle stopped, I stopped. The thing I had always known as me turned off. So thoughts, memories, experiences, emotions, hopes, fears, all of it, it just ended. But what started coming up, I called them clusters of thought, or bundles, and it wasn't thought, it was like complete pieces of information that would like come up like a bubble, explode before your mind. You would know everything that was there, and then it would just go away, and then the next one would come, and the next one would come. And I was getting this constantly, this incredible, and again, it's like a microsecond, maybe 1 second total, but it's this incredible clearness and clarity of like, oh yeah, I never really existed. I've been like a thought, and that now that all of that is gone, what's here now, the awareness that I had now at that moment, that okay, this is me, this is really what I am. All of that other stuff has been like just a mask, just a layer, and I was heading to die, and it was only because of my friend had fallen in as well. And I turned kind of briefly to look at him, and then just this, again, it wasn't thought, it was this bubble came up of like, well, if you don't get out, how is he going to get out? And it was at that moment that I hit a boulder. I veered a little bit off before I went over the canyon falls, and there was a little bit of like sandy ground, and I was able to crawl up. And as I was crawling up, my thoughts started coming back. The mental thought. So it's interesting. When I most needed the mental thought, when I was dying, thought wasn't there. As soon as I was no longer going to die, mental thought returned, and the mental thought started thinking, well, you better get a tree branch, you better get something so you can, he can grab it and you can pull him in, but he was crawling out himself. He was also coming out. The lucky thing of that experience, of course, is that we both fell in together. We both had a very similar type of death acceptance. We both it was all very similar, and we sat there together for an hour, and we just stared at the water for an hour. We didn't say anything, and then we talked about it. And when we found our experience was unbelievably similar, that was the opposite of you. You had no validation, and here I had not just validation, I had like a mirror of my story to really validate it. And that set up a completely different journey than the one I'd been walking up to that point, because it was trying to figure out, well, who is the thing I'm looking in the mirror then if actually it was gone, and it's been still 15 years of trying to understand all that.
Wow. As you were saying that, when I had that acceptance that I was going to die, that's when I stopped feeling that pull. Almost at that exact moment, it was like I had this moment of acceptance, and then like a split second, I was released. And that's how I was able to reach the surface. Because had I been struggling and hadn't had that moment, maybe I would have been pulled under. I don't know.
Yeah, very interesting. Again, the acceptance of this kind of stuff, the acceptance of death, one way or another, is a complete release. It's a surrender of of various things, right? And we as a society have been taught to be afraid of it. Death is this scary thing, and nobody thinks about, well, why is it scary? First of all, what's so scary about it? It might not be pleasant on the way to it, might not be an overly pleasant experience, but what is it about death that's so terrifying? And if somebody's really honest about it, it's the questioning of, did my life really matter? As long as you're still living and there's all these things around you, life is important and what you do and what you don't do. Your wins, your successes are important. Your losses are terrible. But in the face of death, in the face of potential complete oblivion, did any success really matter? Did any failure matter? What does it really matter when you stare into death? And that's the great fear, right? That's really what people are afraid of, this sense of maybe everything I invested all of my energy into my life isn't where I should have invested all of my energy. And that's why if somebody gets courageous enough to examine death and what it is and your relation to it and what it'll be, it has the potential of opening a storehouse of inner power where you can turn it from where it's been going for 40 years to in a completely new direction, right? That's where like a mother gets the ability to lift a car off her kid, when it's that something in that moment of death pushes her into a completely different place, and this inner power, she lifts the car up, and how did you do that? I don't know. I just did. And so I saw that from my own experience, that once you don't be afraid of it any longer and start to try to make it your friend, start to try to listen to it, start to try to see because one thing now I found in the course of my life is the only force that will never lie to me is death. Death is always honest. I may not like what it says, but it's honest. And that's always appreciated.
And it's inevitable. We can't escape it.
100% money back guarantee. And it's the one thing everybody tries to avoid thinking about.
Right.
And instead, once you, I'm going to guess now, your fear of death is completely different than it was before that experience.
I don't know that I had ever thought about it. Because I don't think I had any closeness to it. You know what I mean? Yeah. I had never really had that feeling before. So no reference, really, other than books and films. So it doesn't become real until you are face to face with it.
Yeah. And it's of course, it's like now, for example, people who want to stay true to themselves as they've known themselves to be and don't want to just do what someone else tells them to do, that requires a great courage. There's people in families I know where they're the only one who believes certain things or won't follow certain rules, but everyone else in their family is, and they feel very isolated and very alone, and it takes unbelievable courage to keep going in the face of that. And anyone who has gained some courage in any way from having to either deal with their own death or see the death of someone close to them in a completely different way. Like you talked about my journey. Well, my journey started with a death, not mine, but the death of a really good friend. And it forced me to start looking into it in different ways. And bizarrely, there's no way I would be here doing this interview. I guarantee there's no way all of these things would have happened to me without Joan's death. Joan's death was like the beginning of a spiraling inward. It's not that, I'm happy in any way that it happened, but I can look back now and realize there was something valuable in my story for it happening. So sometimes I say thank you for almost her sacrifice, you might say, that turned out to be a very difficult, painful, because like you were talking about your story, I didn't talk about it for 3 or 4 years to anybody. It was just so painful. And once I finally got it out of my system, finally went to her gravesite, finally sort of, because I felt guilty, of course, I felt somehow responsible for what had happened to her. And once that guilt could be released, I actually I went and had a conversation with her in some other realm, however you want to describe it. And once I could lift the guilt, then the fear around it left, and I could start talking about it with other people. And then it was just a difficult experience, and I'm not the only one who has experiences like this. Other people do too, and you stop feeling alone with it, or somehow feeling like I was the only one that's ever has happened to. And that's where the transformation starts. The change of how you perceive yourself in the world begins to happen from that acceptance. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because before her death, I mean, she was doing everything correct, and doing what you're supposed to do, going to college, get the good grades, have a good job, just be a good person. And look what it did,
Yeah, it was. I mean, she was like a valedictorian of her university. She was on special scholarships to the university that she then went to for her master's degree. She was extremely beautiful, funny, athletic. There was just likable. Everything that you could say. This is what a great package of a person. And then okay, so now she's gone, and a whole lot of people who are acting in a completely self-important, narcissistic, useless, nasty way, smoking 40 cigarettes a day, whatever. Well, they're still living. So if extended life is supposed to be a goal of what you're doing here, like not dying is supposed to be one of your goals, then obviously, like you say, all of these rules we had been taught about how to live they don't have anything to do with that at all then. And so if you start to realize, well, then I don't know when it's going to happen. It could happen 50 years from now. It could happen next week. Why don't I do what I want to do? Why am I going to wait to do the things I wanted to do? And similar to you, that was right about the same time I started saying this is the way everybody works and does things in the world. Around the same time, I was standing at a train subway station at like 8 a.m. I don't know why I was there at 8 a.m. Probably, coming home from some girl's house or something. I was going home, but the doors opened and all of the business people came off to go to work in their suits and their briefcases. And I looked in their eyes, and it looked the same as I saw a documentary of cattle going to get slaughtered. That was the look. And I remember saying to myself, I will never do that, ever. There is no way I'm going to put myself through that world, even though that's the world I'm supposed to do. Nope. And that even meant, like, my mother tried to push me to being a history teacher, because what else you do with a history degree? What do you do with that? Nothing. You're pretty much a teacher. It's useless. But I felt I'd be in the same meat grinder. I would be in the slaughterhouse if I went and I would be controlled as to what I could think, what I could say, what I could teach, what I could not teach. I don't want to do that. And of course, life got very hard because life had been set up in a particular direction. All of that had been pulled out from under me, and I got nothing. But at least I could say, but at least I wasn't there. And I think that's part of that death experience, similar to what you had. Part of it is the realization of, what is it then do I really want? If I'm still here, if death is not taking me now, but could take me soon, what is it I really want to do? And that's one of the powers of the gifts. I said death was honest. And one of the honesty death brings, if you really stare into it, is it'll help you know, what do you really want? What is most important in your life? It'll tell you, well, do it now. If you have something you want to say to somebody, particularly if it's something nice, go say it to them now. Don't wait till next week. You don't know if you or them will still be here. Say it to them now. And that's one of the things I do remember after not only Joan's death, but like after I had my own death experience, was if I wanted to give someone a compliment, even if I had never met them before and I just saw them on the street, I gave it to them. Because it was like, why not? Why not say something nice to somebody? It can really change you if you allow it to.
Yeah. Well, I think in closing, this quote is probably the best way to close this off. You have a quote on your website. It says, "Die while you're alive and be absolutely dead. Then do whatever you want. It's all good." And it's a quote by
Bunyan.
Yeah.
And of course the death, of course, we're talking about is not the death of the body. That's where I got myself mistaken with this idea of suicide, right? The message that was some sort of in my mind was sort of right, but the ego takes the self to mean the body, but the self, or what's really meant is, this thing I've always thought of as me, this false thing that's been running my life. And if I say kill it, or another way, just stop listening to it, stop paying attention to this thing that's been turning my life into the garbage can, well, it'll all change, It's It's our beliefs in our mind and our conditioning and our perceptions, those very things we talked about that are being controlled and manipulated by outside sources. And then we control and manipulate them again.
Uh-oh. We lost you there for a second. I don't know if you're still there. Let's see if you'll come back. I think the last thing we were talking about was the quote on your website, and die while you are alive and be absolutely dead, then do whatever you want. It's all good, by Bunyan.
Yeah. And I was just sort of referring to the idea that it doesn't mean the body, it doesn't mean the experience, it means the self, the thing you've always thought yourself to believe, or the thing that's been controlling your life up to this point most of the time. When that's dead or out of the way, then something much more true is the guiding force of your life. And that's kind of what the quote means. And do what you want. It's all good, because they'll be coming from the truest nature you have, not a mind concept.
Yeah. So it's almost like having a rebirth, you know.
No, because of the way Bunyan means it, it means that the thing that you thought you were is seen through. It becomes a ghost. So it's not like there's something new there. It's literally there's nothing there. And the nothing is then everything. So you are now the totality, while at the same time not how to describe it, not pinpointed as being an object in consciousness. You're technically all objects then, just experiencing through the eyes of this observer.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Definitely.
You won't be able to understand it with the mind, but if it happens to you, you would know exactly what I just said.
Yeah. Wow. Well, if there's anything else that you'd like to bring up, or that you're working on any projects currently.
Well, first, I just wanted to say, I think, thanks for having me on to do the interview. A lot of interviewers, I don't really know much about until you make the offer, but you've done I think you're a really good interviewer. I think you're really clear in how you present things and share things. And so I was really pleased to come on and talk with you and actually meet you. Like I say, I think you're really a really good guy, and I'm glad to have had this introduction to you.
Yeah, I after watching your videos, I knew we would click. You probably couldn't get that same message across by looking at my previous videos, because it was all very, it was all about music and very just methodical and formally laid out. And this season, I wanted to just be really open and conversational and not worrying about time constraints, because I think before that was like the main thing, was just, fitting everything in a half hour or, an hour. And I just wanted to have a more just, natural, between two people,
Right. Yeah. Just like you're out having coffee at the coffee shop, and it's just, you talk until it's time to go.
I think since this whole lockdown began, I just started to really enjoy podcasts and videos. It just, the longer, the better, honestly. I don't know. I just love the long format and not having this like structured, like television type stuff. And the fast videos, I don't like the flickering and the jump, I forgot what they call it, where they jump scenes. So there's constantly cutting. And, I feel like that just appeals to the people who just have a very short attention span.
That's what it's meant to do. Right. Keep the mind focused on things that it normally would stop focusing on.
Right. Jump cuts. That's what it is.
Jump cuts. Yeah. If there's really something interesting and riveting, you don't need that. It will keep the person's attention because of the content.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you for coming on. It was a pleasure meeting you, and hopefully, the circumstances are different and we can travel across borders and we can actually have a cup of tea together.
That would be a fantastic thing. You could take me around. There's lots of great things to see in Texas. And of course, if anybody wants to check me out, the links I'm sure will be in the description box. It's the easiest place to start is my YouTube site, while I still have it. Of course, that at some point will be taken down, but at least for now, it's probably still there. books, you can at least get the titles on Amazon and things like that, and then you can go from there and see if I have things that are interesting and you want to continue listening to what I have to say. Otherwise, it's been, yeah.
I'll definitely have the links in the description, but where else can people find your material?
Yeah, again, that's Howdie Mickoski Talks so far on YouTube. The website is the very poorly named Egyptian-wisdom-revealed.com. I think I'll be changing that in the future. And then you search my name on Amazon, you'll get the books. But on my website, I have more sample chapters than Amazon does if you feel like reading a few chapters of it. And emails at the website if someone feels you need to get a hold of me. And yeah, that's about it.
All right. Well, we'll talk at you later. Hopefully, maybe when you have another book, then we'll have you come on again and kind of.
Yeah, or at the very least, yeah, one of us can cross a border and we can go actually sit and maybe do it, have the camera with both of us sitting there together.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you take care. And
thanks for
we'll
having
see you
me
again.
on.
You're welcome.
Cheers.
Cheers. And there you have it. That was Howdie Mickoski. Please be sure to look him up and support his channel. It's Howdie Mickoski Talks. He's got a lot of great videos and just a lot of great insight. If you like podcasts and, just people talking and breaking down wisdom, definitely a wise person to know and really good person to get to meet. I mean, he's pretty incredible and you got to see his personality and he's very, very approachable. So I like that about people. It's really easy to talk to someone when they don't have this like barrier of attitude. So I like realism and real people and not a bunch of fakery and all this like nonsense that we have today. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, share it, put it on your social media, whatever. You may see it on Instagram and Twitter, and I'll definitely try to get the word out. And stay in touch, make some comments. And if you have a suggestion and you'd like to see a person, on this show, definitely reach out to me. I've already had a couple of suggestions, and I'm going to definitely take that to heart. And moving forward, I mean, I definitely want to keep doing this. But for now, we have a couple of guests coming up that I think you might like. It's more like the music stuff that I used to do, but we're going to do it in this kind of format. So it's more relaxed and not as structured. Next week, we have Luke Potter. Like I kind of mentioned in the first episode that I met him when he was about 16. And that was like 2012. So it's it's been quite a while, and this is the first time we'll have an interview together. And we've been playing his music for a very, very, very long time, and he's got a lot of music that he's had out, and he's an incredible guy and realistic, and just really down to earth. And he's from England, and it's hard to travel these days, but thankfully we have Zoom. And then after that, we have Emmanuelle Sasson. She's an incredible music artist, and she just released a bunch of songs this year, and we've been playing a couple of her songs. So I'm excited to have her on. And then we have Alex Aller. She's a writer and music artist. She produces music. And then we have Eddie Rowley. He's a comedian. He's just a really funny guy. He's just been putting out some incredible content, and he's been doing his latest project. He's been doing like voiceovers on animation, and I haven't discovered if he does the animation himself. So we're about to find that out. And then of course we have Alex Stein, one of my favorite talk show hosts of all time. He's just funny. And he has incredible guests. He's got he's just really looking to interview the best minds on that are outside of mainstream, because mainstream is just they're just regurgitating stuff that we already know, and it's nothing new. It's all kind of boring. People like Alex I just get, he just gets right in your face, and he's not afraid to ask the serious questions, and he's a lunatic, and He's not ashamed to be one. You know, he's he's a comedian. My camera. Need to tape that down or something. But yeah, he's a comedian, so you may have seen him, you know, in Hollywood, or you may see him in the future here in Dallas, Texas. And he is just funny. Look him up on the conspiracycastle.live. But hopefully we'll have him on whatever day that's available, because we're both doing shows and we're both busy. So as soon as our schedules meet up together, I mean, boom, we're going to have a show. All right. Well, with that said, I'd like to end this show and can't wait to see you guys next time. And, you know, thank you for all the comments. I mean, when I did the show with David Weiss, I mean, I wasn't expecting as many positive comments as I did. And I'm very thankful and grateful. And yeah, keep talking. Reach out to me when you ever have suggestions, or, you know, comment on whatever you hear and see. And if I miss something, you know, I'll try to do better next time. So a lot of times I'm on the spot and I have so many things on my mind that I want to ask, and it's hard to put everything down on you know, on a sheet of paper ahead of time, because I'm always like thinking of a new question, or that turns into something else. And then once we get on the interview, it's like you never know where it leads. So that's kind of like how I want to do it from here on, and just have less structure, and like, you know, I don't want it to sound like a boring interview. So anyway, I will talk at you later, and we'll see you next time.